You're walking through a river valley 50,000 years ago. You've been tracking a herd since dawn, moving quiet, staying low against the tree line. Then you stop. Across the clearing, someone is watching you, not one of your group, not from a neighboring camp either. This is someone built differently. Shorter, heavier through the chest, a brow ridge that juts out over deep-set eyes, a body clearly made for cold. You've never seen a human like this before. And here's the thing that should stop you cold. This isn't a different tribe. This is a different species of human. And for most of the time modern humans have existed, this kind of encounter wasn't rare. It was normal. Today, you assume you're the only kind of human on Earth. There's just us, Homo sapiens, one species, 7 continents, no competition. That assumption is only true for the last 30,000 years or so. For roughly 200,000 years before that, at least 3 human species were alive on the planet at the same time, sometimes in the exact same valleys, sometimes in the exact same caves. And it wasn't only Neanderthals in Europe and Denisovans in Asia. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, an entirely separate, much smaller human species survived until roughly 50,000 years ago, standing barely over 3 feet tall, nicknamed the Hobbit by the researchers who found it. In South Africa, a species called Homo naledi, with a brain a third the size of yours, was still alive and possibly burying its dead deep inside cave systems around the same time modern humans were painting on walls in Europe. You didn't evolve alone, you evolved surrounded. The clearest proof of this sits in one cave in Siberia. Denisova Cave, tucked into the Altai Mountains, is the only known site on Earth where the remains of 3 separate human species have been found layered on top of each other across different time periods. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. Not myth, not reconstruction. Actual bone, actual DNA, actual proof that these groups shared the same shelter at different points across tens of thousands of years. So what happened when they met? 4 things. And they're not what you'd expect. First, they fought. Some researchers argue that when Homo sapiens expanded into Neanderthal territory, the encounters weren't always peaceful. Certain genes linked to aggression and hyperactivity in modern humans are absent in Neanderthal DNA, and some scientists take this, alongside evidence of direct competition for the same shrinking herds and cave shelters, as a sign that sapiens outcompeted and in places violently displaced Neanderthal groups as they pushed across Eurasia during the Ice Age. A Neanderthal skeleton found at Shanidar Cave in Iraq shows a rib injury consistent with a projectile wound, the kind produced by a thrown weapon rather than a close-range accident, a type of weapon sapiens used but Neanderthals rarely did. Second, they mixed. In 2010, geneticist Svante Pääbo's team sequenced the Neanderthal genome and compared it against modern humans. What they found upended the field. Modern Europeans and Asians carried small but consistent traces of Neanderthal DNA that weren't present in African populations, meaning the mixing happened after modern humans left Africa. Later refinements narrowed the number to roughly 1.5 to 2.1% of the genome in present-day Eurasians. That's not a rounding error. That's a real ancestor, somewhere back in your family line, who wasn't fully human by today's definition. And the pattern in that DNA tells its own quiet story. Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA, which only passes from mother to child, is essentially absent in modern humans. That means most of this mixing happened between Neanderthal men and modern human women, not the reverse, a detail researchers still can't fully explain. And third, they built entire families together, and it happened more than once. In 2015, researchers analyzed a 40,000-year-old jawbone found in Peștera cu Oase, a cave in Romania. The man it belonged to carried 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA, more than any other modern human ever sequenced. The segments of Neanderthal ancestry in his genome were so large and unbroken that geneticists could calculate exactly how far back the connection went. Not thousands of years, 4 to 6 generations. That means somewhere in this man's great-great-great-grandfather's lifetime, a Neanderthal and a modern human had a child together. This wasn't an isolated case. Genomic studies of some of the oldest confirmed modern humans in Europe, found at Bachokiro Cave in Bulgaria, showed similarly recent Neanderthal ancestors, just a handful of generations back, in individuals living thousands of miles from Romania. Different caves, different families, the same pattern repeating across the continent. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expects. In 2012, in that same Siberian cave, archaeologists pulled a single fragment of bone, barely 2 centimeters long, out of a pile of over 2,000 unidentified fragments. It sat unrecognized for years until protein testing flagged it as human. When the DNA came back in 2018, scientists realized they were looking at something that had never been confirmed before in the entire fossil record, a first-generation hybrid child. Not someone with a hybrid ancestor several generations back, like the man from Romania. An actual daughter of two different human species, one parent Neanderthal, one parent Denisovan. Researchers nicknamed her Denny. She died around the age of 13, roughly 90,000 years ago, and to this day she remains the only confirmed first-generation hybrid of two distinct hominin species ever found on Earth. Think about what that means. Denny's mother was a Neanderthal whose genetic markers matched populations from thousands of miles away in Western Europe. Her father was a local Denisovan, but even his ancestry carried traces of an entirely separate Neanderthal encounter from generations earlier. Two different human species didn't just cross paths once. They crossed paths repeatedly, over vast distances, over enormous stretches of time, and it kept producing children who survived long enough to grow, to be buried, and to be read by scientists tens of thousands of years later. Fourth, they learned from each other. Some of the sharpest tools and personal ornaments found at Neanderthal sites in France, at a cave called Grotte du Renne, look strikingly similar to the more advanced toolkits modern humans were carrying into Europe around the same time. Some archaeologists argue this shows Neanderthals watching sapiens, adapting, copying, exchanging ideas across the species line the same way neighboring human tribes trade knowledge today. Whether that exchange went both directions is still debated, but the toolkits themselves suggest these weren't two silent species avoiding each other in the dark. They were paying attention. And it wasn't only Neanderthals and Denisovans mixing with each other. Both groups mixed with the ancestors of people alive right now. Denisovan DNA shows up at especially high levels, close to 5%, in Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and some Southeast Asian populations. In Tibetans, a Denisovan gene called EPAS, one helps the body use oxygen efficiently at extreme altitude, a survival advantage modern humans inherited directly from a species that no longer exists. A jawbone found on the Tibetan plateau, the Jiahe mandible, later confirmed as Denisovan, showed that this other species had already adapted to high-altitude life more than 160,000 years ago, long before modern humans ever climbed that high. Neanderthal DNA, meanwhile, is woven into the genomes of most non-African people alive today, showing up in genes tied to skin pigmentation, immune response, and even how some people process pain and react to certain illnesses. So the picture isn't ancient humans occasionally bumping into a strange, doomed cousin species before that cousin quietly died out. The real picture is messier and far more human. Different kinds of people walking the same rivers, sheltering in the same caves, sometimes killing each other over territory, sometimes copying each other's tools, and sometimes falling in love, raising children, and passing something of themselves down a line that reaches all the way to you, because that's the part that should actually sit with you. If you have any non-African ancestry, there is a real measurable chance that somewhere deep in your genome, buried under hundreds of thousands of years of history, there's a fragment of DNA that didn't come from a modern human at all. It came from someone with a heavier brow, a stockier frame, a completely different way of surviving the Ice Age, who looked across a fire one night at someone from a different species and didn't see a stranger. They saw someone worth staying with. Go back to that clearing. You're standing across from that figure, the one who isn't quite like you. Maybe you never talked to each other. Maybe this ends the way most of these encounters ended, in avoidance, or worse, in violence over the same dwindling herd. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe, like it did for that man in Romania, and for a girl named Denny in a cave in Siberia, this moment becomes the reason someone exists 10,000 years later. Someone who has no idea, standing in a kitchen right now, that a small invisible piece of a different kind of human is still quietly alive inside them.